And obviously, I understand that you cannot share the details of the letter in its entirety because of its classified nature. But I did want to ask what was your goal and an intent in sharing that letter with John Ratcliffe to the public?
I wanted to make sure that there was public awareness of an area where I have tremendous concern. I've been on the Intelligence Committee for a long time. This was something I thought was particularly important. And you get a letter like this, and it shows that there's going to be a paper trail on something that is important to the public.
For sure. My next question is obviously earlier this week, Senate Democrats released 10 demands regarding the reining in and restricting of ICE, DHS, and CBP. I wanted to make sure to ask, do you, or excuse me, sorry. Senate Democrats have released 10 demands to rein in ICE, CBP, and DHS. Do you believe those demands go far enough?
There's certainly a very strong set of moral principles, and I've been heavily involved in working on the personal data issue. What's going on is ICE is harvesting, people's private personal data. You got Palantir, you got a whole group of important companies basically putting at risk the safety and well-being of the American people. I continue to believe that privacy is a national security issue. It is a personal security issue. And these sleazy data brokers that buy up everything in sight are getting away with a lot.
For sure. And just a quick follow-up to that question, kind of similar in vein, is how do you intend to hold those three agencies? Obviously, they all fall under the umbrella of DHS, accountable in in these upcoming funding negotiations with Senate Republicans.
My sense is Senate Republicans are going home. I'm home having town meetings this weekend, and they're getting a lot of flack. I mean, people thought from the 2024 campaign that these issues were going to be about, drug cartels and murderers and terrorists and the like. And now we're seeing priests and little kids getting picked up and the like. That's not what was talked about in the presidential campaign.
For sure. And to follow up with that, you have your town hall in Lynn County tomorrow morning, correct?
Yes.
Um, I wanted to get I wanted to hear from you on what you've been hearing from constituents, both statewide, but also maybe more specifically in Lynn County, about, you know, ICE, DHS, CBP, same kind of vein.
Oregonians feel that ICE is just stomping all over their constitutional rights and the Bill of Rights. And my town meetings are filled with people who are concerned. There's also tremendous issues with respect to costs and medical costs and electric costs and housing costs and the like. And the ICE issue will be dominant.
Next subject. Obviously, last week the DOJ released another batch of the Epstein files. I believe Todd Blanche said this was the final batch to be released, with many kind of doubting the validity of that statement. Could you kind of comment on where you stand with the release of the Epstein files and how you plan to ensure that if there are other files that need to be released, what you will do to make sure they do get released?
There are other files that need to be released. There are two lanes to this. One is the one we heard about, last week, Pam Bondi, Attorney General, and clearly I wouldn't stay up waiting for them to get out additional information. I'm taking a different approach, and I call it the follow the money approach. The history in our country of really rooting out corruption is to follow the money. And when we first announced it, I went to the floor of the United States Senate and I talk about how Jeffrey Epstein issued more than 5,000 wire transfers involving sex trafficking at just one bank. And so we've got a lot more to do. I'm going to make sure that all of the data gets out, all of the information relating to financing of things Epstein was up to, who enabled him, and the like. And then we're going to have a reform package so that the banks who consistently look the other way at the Epstein activity will no longer be able to get away with that.
And just to follow up, could you elaborate on how you are going to hold those banks as well as others accountable?
I'm going to stay at it until we get all the information. I'm a pretty persistent guy. We started this, by the way, in the Biden administration, and we said this is not a blue issue, it's not a red issue. But when I go to the floor and I talk about thousands of documents, more than 4,000, more than 5,000 documents getting out, we're going to have to make sure that we get all the documents and have real accountability. And then these reforms, nobody else is talking about how the banks just consistently let America down and our families. And we're going to make sure that doesn't happen again.
For sure. Kind of moving ahead, obviously, Trump RX launched today. I was hoping to get your perspective on it and how you think it might help or harm Americans, or if it's just, what the end goal is and how you plan to
Well,
address it moving
the
forward.
end goal is really important, and that's lowering people's prices at the pharmacy counter. And Donald Trump is basically a paper tiger on these issues. Even in his first term, he was talking, for example, about how he's going to drive down rates from our international competition that benefits from the fact that we do all the research. And then he basically was AWOL. He really didn't do anything to pass legislation. Now, I also want Oregonians to know that I'm very troubled by the early information indicating that his family once again is involved in these deals. And we saw that with crypto. Every one of these deals has a situation where you basically see the Trump folks walking in the front door with cash opportunities.
Could you elaborate a little bit more on his family connections to Trump RX?
They have already talked about some of the family members who have been interested. The Secretary of Commerce has been interested. And this is a pattern. In other words, this is not the first time. You see it with the crypto deal as well. They essentially came to the White House this time, relatively needing funds. And then all of a sudden they made extraordinary sums with respect to crypto. I see the same thing being teed up as it relates to pharmaceuticals. They go to these areas that are big opportunities for cash to go into the family pockets.
Gotcha. And I just want to ask this question very briefly because it's the news of the day. Obviously, a lot of people are up in arms about the social media post this morning that has since been deleted and then blamed on an erroneous staffer of the Obamas. Care to comment on that?
Well, it's a disgusting, incredible comment. And you wonder, do you ever run out of adjectives to describe some of the things these Trump folks and the Trump team talks about? Let's see if anybody actually gets replaced, somebody gets fired. There's some real accountability. I'll wait to see that.
Gotcha. And then looking ahead to tomorrow, I just want to ask you about your town hall again. Obviously, I imagine some of the things that we've talked about are going to be the primary focus, but what are you expecting to hear from constituents tomorrow in Lynn County?
I expect them to be, again, incredibly angry with respect to ICE. What we've said in this country, Ben Franklin summed it up, is anybody who gives up their liberty to have security doesn't deserve either. People are going to come to that meeting and they're going to say, what's going on with ICE is not what America and Ben Franklin were all about. And we want changes. And I expect the meeting to be dominated by ICE and then these financial issues where the second word will be cost. It might be medical cost, it might be energy cost, it might be housing cost. I expect the meeting to be dominated by ICE and costs.
For sure. And something I meant to ask you about, and I forgot to, was last week's protests in Eugene that have continued into this week. Thankfully, this week's protests have been entirely peaceful all around. But last Friday, there was the deploying of tear gas as well as other, chemical irritants against protesters. Can you provide your perspective on that?
The overwhelming number of protesters are engaged in First Amendment peaceful protest. And the First Amendment is one of the most important muscles in our constitutional opportunities. And we've got to make sure that it's protected and protected fully. And that's why I think, once again, the Trump people are out of line. We're not taking a backseat to anybody in terms of violence, but we want peaceful protest to be protected.